So the FBI just confirmed that DNA Labs International actually received that crucial piece of evidence. Those preliminary results, they came back on Saturday. Retested, verified, and officially loaded right into the database. Listen closely because this new break in the Nancy Guthrie case changes everything. We are genuinely closer to real answers now than on day one. Michael Ruiz over at Fox News Digital broke the story live this past Thursday, April 16th. Honestly, for everyone tracking this investigation, it finally confirms what we've waited 76 agonizing days to hear. The Bureau just made its most aggressive move yet. That afternoon brought 3 major escalating confirmations, dropping one after another. And that third one, that's exactly why whoever abducted Nancy Guthrie is probably sweating bullets tonight. Think back to before this week. The big leads that actually kept this story alive in the media all shared one frustrating trait. They spiked everyone's hopes and then they completely fizzled out. Take that early doorbell video of the masked guy messing with a Nest camera. The whole country analyzed that clip thousands of times, but obviously it never actually led to a suspect's name. Then there was that black glove discovered 2 miles from Nancy's house. It looked identical to the one that masked creep wore on the porch. For one tense weekend, it really felt like the whole mystery was solved, until they traced the DNA to some local restaurant employee completely ruling him out. That initial DNA swab shipped to the FBI for a CODIS run, total dead end. They pushed it through the federal system, and absolutely 0 matches came back. Then a second partial sample turned up. But it was just way too degraded to even build a proper profile for the national database. Fake ransom emails started flooding into TMZ and other outlets. Eventually, some guy in California actually got locked up just for pretending he took her. Even when federal prosecutors suddenly swarmed Nancy's property one afternoon, authorities just brushed it off, calling the whole thing a standard legal procedure. Despite all those crazy updates, the core investigation basically went nowhere. Plenty of noise and peripheral drama, sure, but absolutely nothing that actually unmasked the guy at her door. But Thursday's update, that's a whole different beast. We aren't just talking about a slight shift in momentum here. This is a fundamental game changer. For the absolute first time since day one, the FBI broke protocol. They did something they practically never do during an active kidnapping hunt with 0 suspects in custody. A named official actually went on the record. They dropped a word-for-word public statement, complete with a hyper-specific timeline broken down the week. How you see you bound by the week. And the underlying reason they played their cards exactly like that on Thursday, well, that is exactly what we are going to unpack right now. Want to know why the feds stepped in so hard? You've got to look at where this case has been stuck since February. Oh, and one very specific local sheriff, Sheriff Chris Nanos out in Pima County, has been front and center since the beginning. Frankly, his bizarre grip on the physical evidence pipeline sparked the biggest controversy of this whole mess. Around mid-February, Fox News Digital dropped a bombshell. A federal insider claimed Nanos was flat out stopping the FBI from touching some massively important evidence. A new Reuters article just dropped. They're making the exact same claim that the local sheriff is deliberately hiding massive evidence from citizens from federal agents. That includes a specific glove. Investigators bagged it right inside Nancy's house, and the Bureau practically begged to run their own tests on it. According to the leak, federal agents pushed hard to send that stuff straight to their elite lab in Quantico, Virginia. But Nanos, he stubbornly demanded the items go to some private facility down in Florida. Turns out his department already had a huge ongoing contract with them. That exact report noted something wild. Pima County already paid about $200,000 to that specific Florida contractor. The insider pointed at all those previous dead ends, heavily criticizing the sheriff for waiting so damn long to call the feds. Nanos went on News Nation shortly after to do damage control. He forcefully declared those stonewalling rumors were 100% garbage. He literally called it insane. Like supposedly there was absolutely 0 drama about him hiding evidence or fighting with the Bureau. Claimed they had a phenomenal partnership all along. He laughed off the very idea that he'd ever actually deny the FBI access. His actual excuse was pretty convoluted though. He insisted they gave the feds certain gadgets right away. Stuff like security cameras, cell phones, and laptops. Since you know, the Bureau is obviously great with tech, they've got the cutting-edge skills to crack digital data on phones or cameras. So yeah, the local guys gladly handed that over. In his exact words, the feds simply possessed the top-tier tools needed to properly analyze that specific electronic gear. But the DNA, that was strictly staying in Florida. He claimed he needed all the biological evidence housed together right next to the family's elimination profiles they already created. Sure, it sounded super reasonable on paper, and honestly, it's the exact shield he's been hiding behind for months. But don't miss the quiet little confession buried right in his statement. Even the sheriff admitted the FBI possessed the absolute best tech for complex evidence. What he totally ignored, however, is what happens when a stubborn biological sample desperately needs that exact federal expertise to actually catch a break. Well, Thursday is exactly what happens. But before diving into the actual scoop, let's kill one massive forensic rumor right now. Because honestly, the internet got this completely wrong at first. Tons of people online keep obsessing over this hair sample the FBI finally grabbed, acting like it might actually be Nancy's. But Brian Entin and his panel of experts have been asking the only question that genuinely matters this week. Think about it. If it was just Nancy's hair, why would a commercial lab waste 11 whole weeks trying to sequence it? Would the FBI seriously demand the physical strand 2 months ago? Would a federal agent purposefully go public on a random Thursday, explicitly confirming they took the original evidence? The answer is absolutely no. Finding a victim's own hair inside their own bedroom just doesn't trigger a massive 2-month federal custody battle over the physical evidence. And it definitely doesn't push the Bureau to drop a named press release bragging about their advanced forensic testing. Everything that went down on Thursday hinges on one massive, undeniable reality. The person that hair belongs to, it isn't Nancy. It's not a random relative, and it's certainly not a friendly visitor who just happened to drop by. That's exactly why the feds seized it, why the timing matters so much, and why they finally broke their silence. Because Thursday's bombshell wasn't just a basic news alert. The whole truth dropped in 3 brutal waves that afternoon, each one stripping the mask off the last. If you were glued to your feed, you literally watched the narrative mutate twice before locking in. A BC News fired the opening shot. Quoting some mysterious insiders, they claimed the feds finally got their hands on massive DNA evidence pulled from Nancy's house in Tucson ages ago. And apparently, the Bureau was breaking out the big guns running next-gen tech to hunt down whoever took her. Those same sources whispered that the private Florida outfit, hired by Pima County, had finally shipped the stuff over to Quantico recently. Huge news, right? Except the wording was ridiculously vague, leaving us to figure it out ourselves. What does shipping a sample even mean in real forensics? And what cutting-edge tech were they actually using? ABC basically crammed a dozen wild implications into one tiny sentence, and we spent the next few hours desperately untangling the mess. Brian Entin stepped up next. The guy from News Nation has practically lived and breathed this nightmare since day one, and he plugged that first massive hole by mid-afternoon. Hopping on social media before taking it to his nightly show, Entin dropped a major detail. The mystery evidence sitting in the federal lab was actually hair from Nancy's house. He flat out verified that actual genetic material from the Guthrie residence was currently sitting at FBI headquarters for a deep dive. Sources tell me they've got hair from the house, he noted. But then he casually dropped a tiny nugget that completely blew up the timeline. Turns out the Florida guys had already run their own tests. They were totally done with the material. So the feds weren't getting fresh evidence to look at first. This was round 2. The private lab spun their wheels for 11 straight weeks, hit a brick wall, and basically had to tag the big dogs in. Having the feds double-check work that a private outfit already botched isn't just standard procedure, man. That is a massive escalation. Then Fox News digital reporter Michael Ruiz stepped up to deliver the final blow. And honestly, he rolled it out piece by piece. His very first post nailed down the exact terminology we're all still arguing about. According to his sources, Florida shipped their data over to the federal guys. Let's get nerdy for a second. Data just means paperwork and computer files, the genetic profiles, the charts, basically whatever their fancy machines managed to spit out while they had the physical hairs. You send data, you're just emailing a PDF. The real deal, the actual biological clue, stays locked in a freezer somewhere totally unbothered. Ruiz actually had to jump back online to correct himself. Why? Because his first draft accidentally made it sound like the real, tangible evidence had been put in the mail. He went out of his way to clarify that right then the FBI only had the hard drives. Zero physical evidence was sitting on their desks. You only bother making that kind of fix if the details are genuinely life or death. And trust me, it mattered. Because the bombshell that dropped next would have been completely confusing otherwise. Even if the rumor mill had just shut down right there, we still would have made major progress on the timeline. Getting a private lab to surrender their findings to the actual government during an act of kidnapping is huge. But honestly, it's just paperwork changing hands. Boring bureaucratic stuff. That alone wouldn't have caused the massive explosion that hit later, because then the third update dropped. And let me tell you, that third piece of the puzzle completely derailed everything we thought we knew. By late afternoon, Ruiz posted a direct quote from the feds. Not some anonymous tip, a real official talking to a real journalist using incredibly calculated words that the agency desperately wanted on the record. I'll give you the exact quote. Ruiz got word for freaking word. They said there is no new DNA evidence in the Nancy Guthrie situation. They noted the Bureau begged for this stuff well over 2 months ago. Instead, Pima County shipped it off to some private gig in Florida. 11 grueling weeks pass, and that facility finally hands an actual hair sample over to federal scientists for examination. They swore they were still totally dedicated, but look closer. 4 distinct agendas are playing out in that quote, and each one is a loaded weapon. First up, the fact that they explicitly complained about asking for it over 2 months ago. That forces their side of the timeline straight into the public spotlight. Cops who are actually playing nice with each other don't go out of their way to announce a massive 60-day delay between asking for a clue and actually getting it. And dropping that exact phrasing was a highly intentional slap in the face. They basically shoved the local sheriff under the bus to protect their own reputation. And honestly, it perfectly backed up all those whispers from back in February when Fox and Reuters started hinting about major behind-the-scenes drama. You know, the rumors about the feds begging for the evidence while the local cops practically held it hostage. Anyway, the second massive detail is how they specifically called it an original hair. That single adjective is the heaviest thing in the entire press release. Because in forensic science, original means they didn't just get a tiny clipping or a useless fragment. The literal primary piece of evidence just completely changed custody. Think about it. Hair eventually runs out when you burn it up in a lab. So if Florida gave up the main piece, they basically admitted defeat. They hit the absolute limit of their tech and begged the government to save them. Detail number 3. They connected the word transferred right to the phrase for testing. And they said it in the present tense. They definitely aren't just shoving this in a dusty basement for some paperwork review. They are flat out telling us the hair is sitting on a microscope right this very second. The absolute final phase of testing was already kicking off the minute that press release went live. That's the real secret code hidden under all that boring cop jargon. Because moving biological clues around is a logistical nightmare compared to how simple it sounds. You don't just slap a stamp on a piece of crime scene DNA and hand it to the mailman. It travels under an insane security umbrella. We're talking paperwork, tracking every human who breathes on it, what box it sat in, and every single second it spends outside a locked vault. Honestly, the receipts matter just as much as the hair itself. If they actually want to lock someone up, that custody trail better be totally bulletproof. Otherwise, a slick defense lawyer will absolutely destroy them in court. So when Florida shipped the goods up to Virginia, it sparked an absolute mountain of red tape. Packaging rules, insane intake steps, and a whole logging process just to get that tiny strand loaded into the federal database with its own unique barcode. And all of that nightmare logistics had to happen before anyone even turned on a microscope. Meaning by the time the feds bragged to Ruiz, they had already cleared the miles of red tape needed to actually start breaking down the DNA. It isn't stuck in the mailroom, it's inside fully categorized. Which brings us to detail 4, that sign off swearing they're totally dedicated to the hunt. Normal folks read that as basic PR fluff. But seriously, the feds absolutely never throw around emotional promises during a live hunt just for fun. Listen, that exact wording. They only drop it when certain people are listening, and Thursday's crowd was definitely mixed. The Guthrie family has been practically begging for some actual progress for weeks now. Meanwhile, Pima County Sheriff's deputies had already made their stance crystal clear. They desperately wanted to play Thursday off as just routine business, not some massive escalation. Look at it this way. Whoever actually made Nancy vanish is sitting somewhere watching these exact same news alerts, and now they know the feds finally have the physical evidence locked down. You really need to put Pima County's Twitter update right next to the FBI's statement. The local deputies claim they've been working hand in glove with federal agents since day one. Their exact spin, no drama, no withheld evidence, and zero friction with federal agents. Just a completely wonderful working relationship across the board. They insisted nothing was new. Apparently that private Florida lab they hired just keeps sharing data with Quantico and other partner facilities nationwide while the DNA work slowly plods along. The stark contrast with the FBI's careful wording basically tells the whole story. The feds explicitly stated they requested it, 2 months prior took it, and are fully invested. Pima repeats their nothing new still working line. Meanwhile, another agency wants Thursday to look like a major escalation, the other side. They're trying to convince everyone that Thursday was just another normal day in a totally smooth process. Obviously, both versions of events cannot possibly be true at once. Who you believe ultimately comes down to one detail. Is shipping a crucial hair sample across the country 11 whole weeks after the initial request just business as usual or a major shift? Honestly, most of the news networks totally blew past the science part on Thursday. But CeCe Moore dropped the real reason this handover is such a huge deal. She went on Brian Enton Investigates right as the news hit. And man, her breakdown takes a boring paperwork shuffle and turns it into an absolute game changer. So check this out. They were only pulling mitochondrial DNA, which honestly, that stuff is mostly just useful for eliminating suspects from the pool. Pinning someone down with it is basically impossible since millions of people match. Normally, you just whip up a standard STR profile in a few weeks and bounce it against CODIS. Let's be real. If the Florida techs had a decent hair to work with, we would have seen a profile ages ago. 11 weeks dragging by before handing it off to the FBI. That was the dead giveaway for Moore. Florida was almost certainly staring at a broken piece of hair without a root. And the genetic material inside a clipped hair shaft? Totally different beast than root. DNA. It completely changes what databases you can ping and which scientists actually have the gear to test it. Not that long ago, forensics experts would have just thrown a rootless hair straight in the trash. We were literally always taught that cut hair shafts held zero usable genetic value for advanced crime solving. Well, the game has officially changed. A handful of cutting-edge American labs figured out how to yank a single nucleotide profile, or SNP, straight out of those damaged rootless strands. Moore gave a massive shout out to Dr. Edward Green over at Astrea Forensics. The guy is an absolute genius running things out of UC Santa Cruz. I honestly love scientists like him. He practically laughed at the old rules tweaking and building out tech until he was pulling crystal clear SNP data from garbage hair samples. SN. So what do you do with an SNP profile? You drop it directly into commercial ancestry sites, the exact same ones regular folks use to figure out where their grandparents came from. Once it's in there, the system cross-references it against millions of everyday users to hunt down distant relatives. Those distant cousins become the absolute perfect starting point. An expert genealogist takes that link and works backward through old birth certificates. They cross-reference marriage licenses, old census data, and public archives until everything finally points straight at one specific guy. This exact playbook is what finally put away the Golden State Killer. It's the same trick they used to catch Brian Kohberger. Time after time, this strategy cracks cold mysteries wide open when standard CODIS sweeps turn up absolutely empty. Ruiz actually called out this massive technical difference on his feedback in February. He noted that FBI standard STR tests are totally different animals than the SNP profiles used for genetic family hunting. It felt like a throwaway comment buried in a massive update back then. But looking back, it was practically a crystal ball showing exactly where this DNA nightmare was headed all along. Moore didn't mince words about the potential here. A damaged piece of hair without a root can 100% break this entire thing wide open. She mentioned hoping they'd snag some hair evidence to test with the newer tech. Because honestly, a single strand is literally enough to get this whole mess solved nowadays. Sure, running the ancestry sites might give them a whole lot of nothing to work with. Or maybe they build a beautiful family tree that points to some random guy who never went anywhere near Nancy's house. Those dead ends are totally real possibilities. But just having the option changes everything, right? Florida just didn't have the gear for this. That's why the FBI slipping in that line about doing advanced testing either at Quantico or through their specialized partner labs is actually the most massive clue in the entire press release. The Bureau keeps a handful of elite private labs on speed dial. They ship off the tricky stuff whenever Quantico gets swamped or when the weird science requires tools they don't own. We usually never get to know who is holding what evidence. But that specific wording, it proves the physical sample is finally stuck inside a machine that has actual backup plans. They can run that strand through their own machines directly or easily ship it out to a hired private expert, a partner who actually knows how to pull SNPs from damaged hair. They can run tests back-to-back or all at once, depending on how that first sweep goes. None of this was possible while it sat rotting in Florida. Over the last few years, the feds have completely beefed up their own internal squads dedicated purely to genetic family tracking. It's gotten so huge they literally have an entire unit armed with commercial-grade ancestry sequencing toys. They keep pro researchers on payroll and have tight deals with those DNA sites to let cops hunt for suspects legally. 10 years ago, this kind of setup was pure science fiction for the FBI. What this actually means is they don't have to farm out every single step of testing the Guthrie sample anymore. Whatever choices they make next about who runs what test will happen inside a machine that has already cracked massive cases using these exact tools. That fact by itself proves we're playing a totally different ballgame than we were back on April 15th. Look, if you've been obsessed with this nightmare since week 1 and want me to break down every major drop like this, smash that subscribe button right now so you don't miss the next big update. Forget the slow official updates. Things are moving at breakneck speed right now, and we will keep tearing into every detail exactly as it drops. We also really need to clear up this whole two-sample confusion. Honestly, almost everyone on social media Thursday totally mixed up the hair sitting at the FBI with that complicated DNA mixture Sheriff Nanos has been talking about for weeks. CC Moore made it crystal clear. We are looking at two totally different forensic hurdles here, and the difference is absolutely huge. That mixed sample. It is an entirely separate biological clue pulled directly from Nancy's house, holding genetic material from multiple people. Nanos has openly brought this up a bunch of times already. He actually warned a local watch group recently that untangling the different genetic profiles in that mixture might honestly chew up another 6 months. During this deep dive chat with journalist Bill Buckmaster, he mentioned his team still thinks the DNA is totally usable, adding that several labs nationwide are hustling hard to figure it out. Back in February, he told News Nation on the record that the scientific hurdle involves splitting DNA and sorting out crazy mixtures. He actually called the whole massive workload, in his own exact words, way above his pay grade. Untangling a complex genetic mixture is just an entirely different beast compared to pulling markers from a rootless hair. Sorting mixtures takes specialized software, crazy math models built for multiple contributors, and a massive chunk of time before you get a usable profile to actually ID someone. Moore actually brought up the serious limits of current untangling tools during her April 9th hit on Brian Enton Investigates, pointing out a crazy detail. At least one tech company out there probably rushed their brand new software launch just to cash in on the massive hype this specific investigation created. So yeah, the mixed sample is going down that path while the hair is on a completely different journey. Honestly, that split approach reveals a ton about how they have structured this massive investigation. Nanos claims there are up to 5 separate labs spread across the country grinding away right now on different pieces of the Guthrie puzzle. But here's the thing. He hasn't actually named these facilities, won't say what evidence they have, and totally dodged whether they are testing separate items or just running duplicate checks on the exact same stuff. Honestly, that huge number just proves we are looking at a massively spread out forensic web, making Thursday's handoff just one strategic chess move in the game. A seriously major move, mainly because having the original item opens totally new doors, but this single step isn't their final shot. You have to assume every single lab is running on its own crazy schedule, while whoever is actually coordinating this whole circus is doing it entirely behind closed doors. These intense scientific hurdles don't just exist in a bubble. They are playing out right next to some pretty heavy expert theories that have totally darkened the mood lately. Just look at Morgan Wright, the top guy at the National Center for Open and Unsolved Cases. Back on March 19th, he flat out told Brian Enton that cops should start treating this as a murder without a body instead of a simple missing person hunt. He broke it down super simply. Basically, the more time drags on, the more this whole nightmare looks like a highly targeted kidnapping that just went horribly sideways. Then you have Brian Martin, a seasoned Fort Wayne police cold case detective, asking tough questions. During an April 7th sit-down with Enton, he admitted his biggest fear is that the kidnapper totally misunderstood Nancy's fragile medical state. They probably thought they could stash her for a day or two, grab some fast ransom cash, and just dump her in public until her failing health ruined the plan. Look, both of these dark theories are pure guesswork right now. Nothing is officially confirmed, but this is exactly the terrifying expert consensus that the DNA results are desperately trying to solve. Because if either of these absolute nightmare theories actually turns out to be the truth, then figuring out who owns that piece of hair sitting in the FBI lab tonight becomes the single most critical, game-changing secret left in this entire messed up case. Meanwhile, the poor sheriff is standing right in the crosshairs taking heavy fire from basically every single angle imaginable. They literally had to fix his official resume after the Arizona Republic dropped a bombshell. Turns out he quit the El Paso force in 1982 to avoid getting fired a full 2 years earlier than he originally claimed. People tore him apart locally and coast to coast for going to a University of Arizona hoops game right at the start of the hunt while Nancy was still nowhere to be found. Now he is fighting a literal recall campaign with furious organizers getting a 120-day clock to gather signatures. Retired FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer even went on record saying his career is basically hanging by a thread. Despite taking all those hits, he is still the guy doing all the talking. So when Nancy's hair got stuck at some private Florida facility for 11 straight weeks, he was the one forced to defend that call. Then Thursday hits. An actual FBI rep officially drops that number 11 on live mic, suddenly putting the sheriff's questionable choices under a brutal new microscope. Take Astrea, for example. This Texas genetics firm practically specializes in the exact advanced DNA extraction the Florida team botched, and they publicly slammed the evidence routing decision as totally devastating way back in February. Their whole argument back then was simple. With a massive national mystery like this, that hair should have immediately gone straight to a specialized facility that actually knows how to handle rootless samples right out of the gate. Definitely not 11 torturous weeks down the line. The FBI's recent statement didn't directly trash him, but placing 11 weeks right next to the word transferred absolutely lets the brutal math speak for itself. All this drama surrounds a family that has spent 76 agonizing days right in the unforgiving public eye, desperately waiting for a single answer. Savannah Guthrie finally came back to the Today Show on April 6th after vanishing for weeks. It was her very first live morning broadcast, sitting next to Craig Melvin in over 2 whole months. Just before coming back, she actually did her first on-camera sit-down about her mom vanishing with her close friend, Hoda Kotb. Honestly, the broadcast was incredibly raw, the kind of unfiltered heartbreak you almost never see from a polished morning anchor. Crying on national television, she admitted the guilt is absolutely crushing her. The terrifying thought that she somehow lured danger right to her poor mother's front door is completely destroying her. She literally apologized out loud to everyone. Addressing the nasty, reckless rumors swirling around, she called the piled-on pain totally unbearable. And speaking directly to her mom, she promised her family would never find peace without the truth. Fast forward to April 16th, and that truth suddenly got way closer to the surface. A single hair that might belong to the exact creep who knocked on Nancy's door is finally sitting in a lab with the heavy-duty tech that Florida clearly lacked. Meanwhile, the actual police operation surrounding this poor family has totally morphed and changed shapes multiple times since February. Right at the start, Nanos claimed roughly 400 cops from state, local, and federal levels were grinding away on this thing in some shape or form, ripping through security tapes, pounding the pavement door to door, and chasing wild neighboring county leads. Since then, the sheriff says they have massively downsized the core effort into a tight squad of about 20 full-time detectives. Obviously, they promise they can immediately flood the zone with backup if a hot lead suddenly breaks. On the federal side, the FBI crew still keeps roughly 24 investigators actively sweating over this exact file as of early April. 40,000 tips. That was the staggering number flooding the hotlines by mid-February alone, and frankly, the phones haven't stopped ringing since. The family is putting up a cool $1 million just to find Nancy. Add in the FBI's $100,000 for arrests or recovery, plus 88, crime throwing in another $102,500, and the stakes are massive. So we're looking at a massive pot-topping $1.2 million. Yet despite all that cash, not a single solid name or location has dropped, leaving us with the massive elephant in the room that April 16th was secretly pointing to, and honestly, nobody online is catching on. Why now, though? Why wait until day 75 to break this news? Why not 4 weeks ago? Or even 2 months back? Look at how the Bureau typically operates in situations like this. Federal agencies don't give a damn about the daily news cycle, but they absolutely sync their public announcements to align perfectly with concrete case milestones. So if an official decides to step up to the mic on a random afternoon to say something highly specific, you can bet your life something major just shifted. In our scenario, that major shift was the actual physical evidence finally landing right on the FBI's lab bench. They were basically just confirming the handoff happened. A week prior, the feds had absolutely nothing to share regarding the chain of custody. Why? Because that material was still sitting down in Florida. Once the package shipped, everything changed. And honestly, that's exactly why Thursday brought the big announcement. But get this, the number 11 holds the rest of the puzzle. As a general rule, federal agencies absolutely hate putting public timestamps on their own internal evidence demands. But when they do it, that timestamp is the entire message. The FBI easily could have just said weeks. They could have easily vaguely said months, but no, they clearly said 11 very specifically and smashed it right against the phrase requested over 2 months ago. That's incredibly intentional. The most obvious takeaway here is that the feds wanted everyone to plainly see the frustrating gap between them being ready to process this evidence and them actually getting their hands on it. They didn't need to scream it from the rooftops, they simply let the numbers do the talking. So here's a question for anyone who's been obsessing over this timeline. When you noticed the FBI mentioning they asked for that stuff 2 months ago, did it sound like standard bureaucratic fluff to you, or did you catch that underlying bite? Let me know down in the comments. Honestly, when the Bureau picks its words on a high-stakes case like this, it's almost never an accident. It's basically a massive neon sign pointing right where they want the public focus shifting next. There's one last thread pulling all this together, and to be fair, mainstream coverage almost never puts it this bluntly. That Florida lab held onto this hair for 11 weeks. 11 weeks. That is a massive chunk of time for a private specialty lab to test a single biological sample, especially with the whole world watching so closely. Look, if their specific methods could have pulled a workable DNA profile from it, they absolutely would have. If they managed to scrape together even a tiny partial hit for the CODIS system, they definitely would have flagged it. Giving the original sample back to the feds after those 11 long weeks tells us one of two things. Either Florida hit a total dead end with their tech, or they found a tiny trace but knew they didn't have the heavy machinery required to take the next step. Either way, it means the exact same thing. We are dealing with the toughest piece of biological evidence yet, and shipping it off to Quantico proves they desperately needed a much bigger batter lab to crack this open. That's the heavy reality hiding right in the FBI's final sentence. By promising to keep going, they're stepping up to own the most stubborn piece of evidence in an investigation that's basically broken every single forensic tool they've thrown at it. If they actually manage to extract DNA from a rootless hair and snag a solid SNP profile, we could literally see this whole nightmare resolved in a matter of weeks rather than endless months. But if the extraction bombs out or the family tree leads nowhere, they'll have to pivot right back to those mystery samples that the unnamed lab's Nano keeps hinting about. Let's talk about realistic timeframes. Assuming the Bureau or their hired guns start testing this hair the second it arrives, we're probably looking at a schedule, something like this. Ripping SNP data from a rootless hair shaft just isn't an overnight job. Even for labs entirely dedicated to this exact science, The actual extraction can easily drag on for weeks. It totally depends on the sample's degradation and getting enough clean genetic material from the shaft. Say the extraction actually works out, generating a profile solid enough to plug into a genealogy database. That initial database scanned lightning fast. But mapping out the actual family tree tracking distant cousin connections all the way down to a single name is the part that's going to burn serious clock. Take the Golden State Killer. Building that tree took a huge team of pros weeks of non-stop grinding, and they were incredibly lucky to have an insanely rich match pool. In harder cases with super distant matches, charting that whole tree can easily eat up months. There is absolutely nothing fast about this road. But here's the kicker. Every single step now relies on heavy-duty resources the Florida lab just didn't possess, which perfectly explains why Thursday's move was such a big deal. Honestly, there's an easier way to look at this week's events. Before Thursday, the absolute peak of DNA testing for this case was trapped in a private Florida lab, totally handcuffed by whatever limited gear that specific building had on hand. Post-Thursday, the absolute highest tier of DNA analysis shifted straight into the FBI's hands, and through their massive contractor network, they now have immediate access to that highly specialized, rootless method. That exact hair SNP technology is precisely what the American forensic system has been aggressively building out over recent years. The skill ceiling just skyrocketed. That is the real-world translation of what that FBI official confirmed on April 16th, and it's exactly what all those flashy clickbait headlines totally missed. Back on Thursday, April 16th, the feds who spent 2 grueling months begging for this hair finally got their prize. That right there is the whole story. It's not some massive breakthrough or a dramatic arrest. It's literally just a sealed hair sample moving between lockers with an FBI rep explicitly dropping the word original on the record to verify the transfer. Whatever happens inside that lab over the next few days will decide everything. It either ends the case soon or keeps us hopelessly stalled out on day 76. Hey, if this deep dive gave you clarity that the mainstream news completely missed, hit subscribe. Turn those notifications on because things are about to heat up in this case. Over the coming weeks, the gap between skimming clickbait headlines and hearing the raw story is literally the difference between deeply understanding the facts and just being lectured. We're sticking to the deep cuts. Just a heads up, this video relies on public reporting from Fox News Digital, ABC News, and News Nation, plus official statements directly from the FBI and Pima County Sheriff. Nobody has been formally charged regarding Nancy Guthrie going missing. Furthermore, every single person we've mentioned today remains completely innocent in the eyes of the law until proven otherwise in court. Our hearts remain with Nancy, her family, and absolutely everyone fighting to bring her safely home. In moments like this, one truth rises above the noise. Justice cannot grow in the shadows of rumor, ego, or delay. When a family is suffering and a community is holding its breath, every piece of evidence deserves honesty, urgency, and respect. This story reminds us that truth is not found through wild speculation or sensational headlines, but through patience, science, and the courage to keep searching when hope feels thin. It also teaches a powerful moral lesson. Real responsibility means working together, not protecting pride. When institutions cooperate, when experts are allowed to do their jobs, and when facts are placed above personal control, the path to justice becomes clearer. A single breakthrough can come after weeks of silence, but only if people refuse to give up. Most of all, we should remember the human heart inside every investigation. Behind every case is a life of family and a pain that cannot be measured by headlines. That is why we must choose compassion over gossip, truth over drama, and perseverance over despair. Because in the end, justice is more than solving a mystery. It is a promise that every victim matters, every truth matters, and hope must never be abandoned.